monitoring activity and performance. All right, so what we're talking about in this video is troubleshooting, becoming master troubleshooters, because the better we are able to troubleshoot something, the faster we'll be able to solve problems, which will, of course, save us more time for ourselves, and we'll also look like heroes in everyone's eyes because, of course, we have all the answers. So that's what we're talking about in this video, activity and performance, and then we're going to break it down in the first segment here by tools. We'll look at all the different tools we're going to be talking about and whether they fall into an activity category. And activity isn't just monitoring SQL Server activity, but also developers out there. You want to monitor your own activity to see how your stored procedure calls or anything coming in from an application, we can trap it. And we have some really cool debugging tools in here, both for administrators and developers, and I'll walk you through them. I've got a few life-saving tools that I owe many, many paychecks to. So I'll talk about those, and also we'll get into some performance tools. And really, the performance tool we're going to be talking about here is the system monitor in Windows. That'll basically there's many counters that SQL Server comes with when you install it, and we'll analyze some of these counters to help us trap for those specific bottlenecks in our system. We'll then move on to that activity. We'll talk about how to monitor SQL Server processes, SQL Server locks, and then I'll also show you that little tool. Actually, it's a very, very large tool, but a cool, very interesting tool that will allow us to monitor our own activity on the developer side that will help you trap and debug your applications. We'll also talk about auditing events. There's a couple of new features in SQL Server 2005 that will allow us to trap for events at the database and the server level. And once the event happens, we can take that data and put it somewhere and analyze it at a later time. So really cool video here. And really the goal is to get you familiar with all of these different tools so we can become master troubleshooters. So let's jump right into it here and get familiar with the tools of the trade when it comes to monitoring activity and performance. First up is some performance tools. As I mentioned earlier, we're actually going to be using the system monitor in Windows. And basically what happens is anytime you install a SQL Server instance on a machine, you'll get a set of counters related to that instance. So if you have more than one instance, you'll have the same counters for each instance. So there are tons of counters, and a counter is just simply a measure of a specific property in SQL Server or a specific performance counter. So there's counters for memory management, all types of different ways to measure certain areas of memory. There's also for queries, stored procedures, counters for actual processing time of certain code blocks or things like that. There are monitors for logins, logouts, the amount of connections, number of connections per second, tons of different monitors. We'll go through a couple of them just to get you familiar with how the system monitor works if you're not already, and also get you familiar with some of the different counters that'll become useful in finding these bottlenecks in SQL Server. We also have the SQL Server Profiler, and this tool I cannot say enough positive things about simply because I owe it many paychecks. And this thing, if you haven't used it, you're going to love it. If you have used it, you know exactly what I'm talking about because it is such it has such range, this tool. It can really be used for anything. It can be used for monitoring and analyzing performance, for monitoring and analyzing activity, for auditing, for debugging. This is what I was talking about with for developers for debugging applications. I mean, that's why it fits in every category here. It is such a nice broad range tool that I really suggest you get familiar with it. And I'm going to get you familiar with it. Again, if you're not already familiar with it, you're going to love it. If you are, this has been in previous versions of SQL Server, but it just keeps getting better. Just keeps aging and evolving. Wonderful tool, as I said. We'll get familiar with it. Some activity tools here. Pretty much SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. We have a few nodes under the management folder that will allow us to monitor things such as current activity, current process information, locking information about your objects. You can also monitor and view all of the day's log files. Some other things we can do in here too, and we'll take you through all that. And of course, the profiler again as an activity tool. Wonderful little tool. We also have some auditing tools, and really we have a new feature in sql2005 called DDL triggers, data definition language triggers. In the past, triggers were just, you know, standard things we'd put on tables if we need to do anything extra after the data is put in or before the data is put in. Now, and those were all just data manipulation, DML triggers, right? Because they would fire off an insert or fire off an update. Well, DDL triggers fire off of there's tons of things you can trap for, but to keep it simple here, create statements, alter statements. So basically what this allows us to do is put a trigger at the database level that says, hey, anytime this table changes, anybody adds a column, removes a column, changes a data type, nullifies a column, whatever the case, that we can put a trigger on it to fire and then trap exactly what happened and who did it and at what time, so on and so forth. So really cool stuff. You can also do server level triggers. So we can put triggers at the server level to say trap for logins, any new logins that were created. And it's just a whole host of different things that we can put triggers on and trap for. And I'm going to give you a nice big demo on this to show you how to create a database level trigger and a server level trigger, because I think these are very, very useful. Also, we have event notifications. And event notifications are very similar to DDL triggers. We can hook up events, and this actually all works through the service broker. So we're not going to touch on this in this video. I wanted to mention it, but we are going to be using this in a future video when we talk about the service broker. Very, very in-depth look at the event notifications and how the service broker works, but I wanted to mention it because it is an auditing tool. Another one that I didn't mention in here is the Database Engine Tuning Advisor. And this is just another, it's a huge tool. We could dedicate an entire video to it, but I'm actually going to save it for when we talk about indexes, because it's a tool for analyzing the design of a database. And you create a workload, and a workload is just a set of SQL statements, or basically a set of work that a SQL statement would have to do. And you throw that workload against a table, and Database Engine Tuning Advisor does its thing and just basically has suggestions for the design of your database, or the design of a table, or the design of an index, so on and so forth. But again, I wanted to mention that because it is a performance tool, but it's kind of not a broad performance tool or activity tool. It's kind of targeted at design. So we'll talk about that when we get to indexes. I wanted to mention it. And again, the SQL Server Profiler keeps showing on up because it deserves to, because it's such a wonderful tool. All right, so let's get familiar with a few of these tools. Starting off with the System Monitor, we're going to deal with performance. So to open the System Monitor, we want to get down into the Start button here, drag on up to Programs, and on over to Administrative Tools. And inside of there, you'll see a Performance menu item. As soon as we open this up, we're going to get our System Monitor. Now, if you're at all familiar with Windows NT or Windows 2000, then you're probably very familiar with the Performance Monitor. That's exactly what this is it's the Performance Monitor given a new name. So that's a System Monitor. And how it works here is we have a real-time, pretty much a real-time graph of these counters below that are added in by default. So we have a memory object, we have a counter inside of the memory object, we have a counter inside of our physical disk object, and a counter inside of our processor object. So this is basically how it works is we choose an object has a bunch of counters, and we add that counter that we want to measure performance on. So we're going to go ahead and start up a new one here by clicking on the new button. The next thing we need to do is get some counters in here so we can measure our performance against that data. And we do that by clicking on the Add button. And when you click on the Add button, we get our little Add Counter dialog box here. And the first thing you want to do is choose the computer that we want to analyze performance against and what counters we want to grab from which machine. And that's the nice thing is you can analyze performance remotely. So by default here, it'll have your local machine. I have SQL Nugget typed in. This is remote. We are on VB Nugget here, so we are going to analyze some remote performance counters. After you get your machine selected, the next thing you want to do is grab your object. And your performance object is pretty much your category. What category would you like to grab counters from? And there's tons of them in here. And this is all going to be based on what you have installed in your machine. For instance, I have the .NET 2.0 framework installed. So we get all of these ASP.NET and the .NET Common Language Runtime, all kinds of counters in here for it. You have your standard Windows counters, and then all kinds of SQL Server counters. And you can see these are broken out by instance, as I mentioned earlier. We have our development instance SQL Server counters and our production instance SQL Server counters. And then there's more counters for Windows-oriented things, physical disk for your disk activity, processor utilization. And then we have a bunch of SQL agent stuff in here as well, broken out by instance. Now, if you're not sure what kind of a bottleneck you're looking for, you just don't know what's happening on your machine, Microsoft recommends that you check 3 areas first. And these areas are disk activity, processor utilization, and memory management. Now, 2 of those are going to be directly related to SQL Server, and that's going to be disk activity and memory management. Processor utilization, that's pretty much at the server level, but you can still use that and compare, processes in SQL Server to find out if they are processor intensive. So just to help you along the way here and kind of give you some insight on how to trap for disk utilization issues or memory management issues, what you can do is there's tons of categories in here, and this is actually a little annoying bug that you see here. This um, you see how the text is kind of cutting it off. Basically, what Microsoft needs to do here, not to tell them how to do their work because they do a good job, but they need to expand this combo box to the length of the contents, which isn't very hard to do programmatically. Somebody just forgot to do it. But anyway, so one thing that we can circumvent that though, and you really want to see them, you can hit this explain button here, which is really nice because there are so many counters in here and we'll never know what they all do. But the explain button just gives us a little idea of what they do. So, and another thing, because we can't really see this, all you can see there's 3 buffers. Well, which buffer am I choosing? Well, if you click on one and then you hold your mouse over this little title bar here, now you can see the full length. You can see MS SQL, $prod. This is pretty much your category, and then your counter, excuse me, your object is going to be your buffer manager. So, and then under there, we have all kinds of counters to choose from. Now, for disk activity, if you have, issues and you think SQL Server is doing too many reads and writes, these 2 counters are very, very helpful. These are 2 wonderful counters, page reads and page writes a second. This will basically tell you, if these are too high, it's basically telling you there's a lot of fragmentation going on in your SQL Server database. And basically what that means is we're not at the optimal level of reading and writing to our database pages. And what that basically means, and the best way to circumvent this issue, is if these are off the charts, what you need to do is look at what database is causing that, first of all, or database is, and then run the Database Engine Tuning Advisor. And basically what that'll tell you is to get more index coverage, or it'll suggest better indexing. So, and that's all it really relates to, or even blowing away your indexing and rebuilding your indexes because they are highly fragmented. So, just some information here on how to deal with disk activity. Those are 2 of the best counters you'll find for that. Also, for memory management, we have the memory manager object here, and this has all kinds of different memory management counters inside of here. Total server memory, see what SQL Server is consuming on the dynamic memory side of things. Maybe you should change that to static memory if it's doing too much. So you can see there's lots of things to choose from here. That's the nice thing. You can never have too many counters because the more we have, the more data we can analyze. And the more data we have, the better choices we can make, right? All right. Now, one other useful one that I want to show you that I use constantly is this databases object. And basically what you have in here is everything related to databases. Transactions a second, percentage of the log use, log truncations, log growth, strengths, all kinds of stuff related to the transaction log, which is important and good to know because that can really affect performance if these are off the charts. And the nice thing about this too is you can do it at the database level. So you can choose your counters and you can choose multiple counters at once here. Just go ahead and choose a couple of them. And then you can choose again here the instance. What database do you want to trap? So if you want to trap them all, you can get the sum of all the databases counters as well. So kind of neat. We'll go ahead and do that here. We'll click the add button and boom. It'll add all of these counters inside here. It's a different color line. And now we have our little real-time bar here that's just go ahead and it's throwing all that data to our screen. We can also view the data in a couple of different ways here. You can view a histogram of the data, or you can also view just the actual raw numbers themselves in real time, so just different views of the same data. You can also remove a counter if you didn't like to, you didn't need it anymore. You click on it down here, choose remove, add more counters, so on and so forth. So it's still a pretty simple interface. The hard part is just finding what counters you need to analyze, or the hard part is, of course, finding what the bottleneck is. But we have so many counters in here to choose from, we'll eventually find it, right? All right. Now, some other things I want to show you here is the performance logs and alerts. These are kind of cool because not all the time are we just going to sit here and watch this occur. Most likely what we want to do is we'd want to create a log file. And you can see there's a sample one that comes in here. But basically, it's very simple. You just create a log, add some counters into it, just as we did in the previous dialog box. Set the interval, set the units, and then you can set a schedule too for when, when you want it to start up and stop and all that. But this will just create a running sequential log of all of those performance counters. So that's kind of nice. Then you don't have to sit there and watch it all day long. You can also create alerts, which is pretty much the same thing. You just specify what counters you want to add, only you set limits. You say if this counter goes over this limit, then send an email, send a net send, do whatever you have to do to notify somebody that something is happening that shouldn't be happening. So that's the performance log and then the system monitor. And again, very, very simple tool to analyze performance. Getting familiar with those counters, by the way, is easy to use using Books Online. I just want to show you this really quick. If we go to the Start button, on up to Programs, on into SQL Server 2005, on into documentation and tutorials, and into SQL Server Books Online here. Once you fire this baby up, if you type inside of here, performance counters, and then you go down into here to SQL Server, and you can go to About Performance Counters. Actually, I believe it's listed here. If you go inside of here, look at this. There is actually all of those objects that we were just looking at broken out, and very, very good detailed information in here about each counter and what they do. So, Books Online, search for performance counters, and that'll make it a little easier to find what counters you're looking for rather than searching through that list, clicking on things and looking at the explain button. So I just wanted to point that out. That's the performance log. And system monitor, and that's pretty much how we monitor performance in SQL Server. Now let's move on to monitoring activity. How we do this is through SQL Server Management Studio. So we want to click on the Start button, drag on up to Programs, and on over to SQL Server 2005, and right down to our SQL Server Management Studio here. As soon as this fires up, we're going to go ahead and cancel our ad hoc connection. What we're going to do is connect through Object Explorer. So let's drop down our production SQL servers here in our registered servers area. We'll right-click on our SQL 2005 prod instance, choose Connect, and Object Explorer. So that'll give us a connected session to that instance inside of Object Explorer. Now what we can do is drop down our management node, and inside of here, we have a couple areas that we can do some monitoring of current activity. We have SQL Server logs, and this is very similar to SQL Server 2000. The difference is it's evolved into something a lot greater than just standard old SQL Server logs, because if you double click on any of these, we'll click the current activity here, it's going to fire open this nifty new interface. Little dialog box here that has a consolidated view of all of our logs. So this is really cool because now not only do we have SQL Server current activity, but look at this. We have all of our event logs inside of our local operating system here, or actually this is on SQL Nugget, so our remote operating system, since we're connected to our SQL Nugget machine. And also we have SQL Agent, and if you have SQL Agent enabled, you'll have all your current activity in there. And also if you have database mail enabled, you'll have your database log in here. So this is very slick because, again, it saves us an extra step of going in and connecting to Event Viewer and hooking up into the Windows NT event logs, finding that specific event log, and then flipping between screens if we need to do any comparisons, or if we have a security issue inside of our SQL Server log and we want to take a look at if it's happening at the Windows level. It just saves time, saves us a lot of extra steps. So I applaud Microsoft for this one. They did a good job. Very easy to use interface as well. And a nice thing here is anytime you put a check next to any of these, it's going to add all of those log entries into our list over here. So basically you can queue up all of these items into this list, and then you can either export it, you can filter by specific columns in here if you're trying to find a specific event, or you can even just do a plain old search for a specific log entry in here. So a very, very slick, very handy interface to use here if you need to monitor not only SQL Server activity, but all activity. Now we can also view process information. So what I mean by process information is the current processes that are going on SQL Server, and that is through our activity monitor here. If we double click on this, we get pretty much the same nifty interface as before, only this time we can only view, of course, just standard old process information, all the current processes that are currently happening inside of SQL Server 2005, our instance, and pretty much just that, just all the processes, what application the process is coming from, and then all the information about it. You can also right-click on any of these. You can view the details. Very similar if you're familiar with SQL Server 2000's little activity monitor. Same exact interface here. It's just now you can expand the window, which is nice if you have a big Transact SQL batch that you're looking at. Also, you can kill it just as we could before. You just right-click, choose Kill Process if you want to get rid of it. And that's pretty much it. You can also view your locking information. You can view the locks by object, what objects hold what type of lock, what object they hold the lock on, and then just information about the lock itself, the type of lock, again, what database the lock is on. You can also view locks by specific objects. So you can choose any object in here to see the current locks that are on that object. So this is nice because it's a little more structured. Before we just had a big long list of all our locks, and it was kind of a pain to look through and find specific locks. If we had a deadlock, we had to get rid of and kill. If that was locking up a process. But now we can do filter, as I said before, or you can choose a specific object that has a lock to view all of the locks on it. So nothing too crazy there, just pretty much very, very simple views, just better ways of managing all of this logs and all of these activities. All right, let's take this a step further and talk about monitoring activity using my favorite tool, the SQL Profiler. So to get the SQL Profiler started up here, we want to head to the Start button, drag on up to Programs, on over to SQL Server 2005, and this time into the Performance Tool folder here. And right down at the bottom, you will see the SQL Server Profiler. As soon as we fire this baby up, we have a couple of options here. We can pretty much start a trace, or we can create a template, or we can even open a trace or open a trace table, and I'll explain those in a second. What we want to do though is click on the New Trace button here. You can also go to File and New Trace. First thing it's going to ask you is, where do we want to trace these events from? What do we want to watch happen on what machine? We're going to choose our production machine over there on our SQL Nugget server. And this is the dialog box that you're going to get familiar with. Basically what we need to do here is you can give it a trace, a trace name if you'd like to. We'll call this, how about the test trace? Just some information about where you're connecting to. Also, if you want to use a template, and this is kind of nice, if you're going to use Profiler often, I suggest making your own templates because it'll save you a lot of time in the long run. And there's also predefined templates in here. For instance, if you want to trap transact SQL statements coming into this server, you could choose T-SQL. Stored procedures, you could choose the stored procedure counts here. And again, there's all kinds of predefined templates, mainly surrounding transact SQL. We're going to go with the standard default here to start out. You can also choose to save this trace to a file, and this is where you can, of course, open that file if you need to analyze anything in that trace. You can also save it to a table, and this will do the same thing. If you click on if you check this here, it's just going to ask you where do you want to save it by connecting to a machine. I'm going to choose cancel. And then if you're going to let this trace run for a while, you can enable a stop time, and it'll just dump it into that file or table, or just let it run on screen if you're not doing either of these. The next thing is the event selection. What do we want to trap for? And by default here, since we chose the standard template, this is what we get. Now, how this works is our events are over here, and then our columns are over here. So this is basically the output from the event. What output do we want to see from this event? And this is kind of cool how this works. So you get a couple of description group boxes down here. This first one is the description on the event. The second one is the description on the output. So you can see if I go across here, the bottom one here will change text data to application name to NT username to login name. But the one above that, audit login, will stay the same because that's the row we're on here, the audit login. So this is just audit a login. This will audit a logout. Existing connection will just give you properties of the existing connection. The stored procedures event, basically anytime a stored procedure is called, which RPC stands for remote procedure call, it'll trap that and give us all this data about that stored procedure call. And any transact SQL statement, whether it's when it starts and when it completes, will also be output. So these are the defaults here. Another thing you can do is hit show all events. And watch this. There are tons of events, literally tons of events that you can trap for. These are all the categories in here. So you can see you have the service broker, all kinds of things we can trap for in there. The CLR, the common language runtime. If you're importing any assemblies to use, you can trap any of the assembly that was loaded. Cursors, if you're using cursors, you can trap all kinds of cursor stuff. And there's just tons of things in here that you can trap for. Here's even a performance tab here if you want to analyze, watch the performance degradation happen. There's also security audit, and you can see this is bold because we have one checked, and by default, our audit login and audit logout are in here. If you scroll down here, sessions is in here. Here's all the stuff you can do with stored procedures, all the things you can do with transact SQL statements, and then there's a couple of other ones down there. But you can see there's quite a few of them. You can also choose show all columns if you want to trap for more than just the standard columns that come with it. The standard columns we have is text data. This is going to be the pretty much the main one. It's the actual call that was made to the SQL server. It'll actually show the data. For instance, if it's a transact SQL call, we'll have the actual statement in there. We also have the application name that made the call, the NT username, the login name, the CPU cycles, the hard drive reads and writes, the duration of the call, the client process ID. You can see it just goes on, and here are all the extra columns that aren't in here by default that you can trap for, and there's tons of them. So read these descriptions if you want to go further into some of these columns. Another cool thing you can do is put filters on these columns, and I'll come back to this here in a second. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click Run. And what happens now is this trace is enabled, and you can see here's our existing connections. When there are 3 existing connections currently on our SQL production machine, here are the usernames that are associated with those connections, the login names, and then you can even go as far as to see the start time, the end time, and the binary data associated with them. Again, this text data is going to be really the cream of the crop here, what you're really going to be looking at to analyze anything, because it's the actual data that's happening. You can see things are happening right now because this trace is running. So anything that's happening in those events in SQL Server, it's going to trap them and put them in here. And you can see here's a stored procedure call that was made, SP reset connection. And this was called by the report server. Since we have a reporting server running, it's going to trap, of course, any report server stored procedure calls that are happening. And a couple other things, if you can actually pause, you can go ahead and pause the trace. Now it's not tracing anything. And this is good for if you want to scroll up and check things out. You can just pause a trace. Also, if you don't want it to auto scroll, you can uncheck this and it'll stop auto scrolling, because when you're running, it's constantly scrolling to the latest event that has happened. Now, a couple of things you can do here. We can hit the clear trace window here. That'll clear everything out. You can search anything. You can search any of these columns for anything specific. Another cool thing, you can click the properties button and check it out. We're back in the beginning here. The only difference, if the trace is running, you cannot actually alter any of these. You can only view them. You can see everything's disabled here. But if you do want to edit anything, you can hit the pause button, then come in here and check it out. Anything's enabled, and you can uncheck and recheck things, add new events in here. Traces, so on and so forth. We're going to cancel here for the time being, because what we're going to do, I'm going to leave this trace running. We're going to head back over to SQL Server Management Studio and run a little transact SQL statement and watch it get thrown inside of our trace here. So what we're going to do is we're going to head on into databases. We're going to connect to our AdventureWorks database here by right-clicking on it and choosing New Query. That'll pop us right into our AdventureWorks database. The first thing we're going to do, and basically what we're going to do here is inside of our bug testing.testers table, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to truncate it. We're going to take all the data that's in it and get it out of there. Truncate, oop, forgot the table statement there. Table, bug testing.testers. We'll highlight that, hit execute, boom. So now there's no data in it. There's one statement. Also on my clipboard here, I'm going to paste this in here. We have a bulk insert statement that I'm just going to reload this table with a bunch of testers. So we'll highlight that, hit execute, and let's do it a couple of times. Let's get a lot of data in there. There we go. There's almost 60,000 rows. And the final thing we're going to do is grab all the data from it. So we'll do a select splat from bug testing.testers. We'll highlight this, hit execute, and there we go. So we did quite a bit there. Let's take a look at what the profiler thinks we did. So we'll switch back here, and you can see there's quite a bit of data in here. And you're going to actually notice there's all of this data. Anytime you even navigate, just by clicking on tables and navigating the structure, it's actually running SQL statements to get that. And that's what all of this first stuff up here is all of that behind the scenes stuff just to do that. We enter the picture right about here. I'm going to go ahead and pause this so it doesn't jump around on us. There's the last jump. We ran that statement 3 times. So here's the first one. Here's the second one, and there's the third one. And you can see on the ending statements, the batch, because it's a batch starting and batch completed. On the batch completed is when you'll get all the data about the CPU cycles, the reads, the writes, the duration of it, and also the end times as well. So pretty cool. If we actually, if we scroll up a little bit, here's our truncate table statement. You can see that emptied the table for us, and that's all the truncate statement does, just completely wipes out a table. And if we scroll down here, here's our select statement. So a really nice, this can be a nice debugging tool for code. It's a tool, it's an all-around tool for absolutely everything. A couple other things we can do, some usability features here. You can see this area down here is pretty much this text data column. It's just that if you have a big statement, you're not going to, of course, be able to scroll through all here and see your statement. So that's what this is. This is just a big little text area, pretty much your text data column with a lot more space to look at, especially if you have long stored procedures or queries. You're going to want to see the whole thing. So this is exactly how they were executed at the SQL level. And you can see how useful this would be if it was coming from an application. Just kind of gives you the middle ground between the call and the actual database. Some other things I want to show you here. Since we're in pause mode, let's head on into our properties and head on into our events here. And let's put a column filter on our login name. Because you notice there's a lot of junk in there that we don't want to say. Say we only wanted to trap for just things that were coming from ourselves. Well, what we can do is choose our login name like, how about CBT Nuggets / trainer. So this is going to be, of course, the actual login name of the user, which is our domain name plus our actual NT username. So if we hit OK here and then hit run, and now I'm going to go ahead and clear this, stop and restart it here. What's going to happen is you're not going to see anything except stuff that is coming from us. So if you're on a production server, even a development server with a lot of activity, things are going to be flying inside of here constantly. So this really helps because it allows us to just filter by things that are only happening by us. So if we come in here and we hit the select statement now and switch back, look at that. So we don't get all that other garbage in here as well. So that's the SQL Server Profiler. Again, one of my favorite tools out there, just simply because it really does help no matter what you're troubleshooting. If you're troubleshooting development issues or performance issues, it's another tool that'll really help us get down and dirty with the data. Now let's move on to DDL triggers and talk about how we can put a little auditing on our databases. And what I do here is I have a query that I'm going to open up here by going to File, Open, and then File again. And I have a little DDL triggers query here that we're going to take a look at, or I should say script that we're going to take a look at here. And we're going to connect right up to our production database, and I'm going to change this to point at our AdventureWorks database. And again, a DDL trigger is just, DDL stands for Data Definition Language. And really what it allows us to do is log any kind of SQL statement that is run against any object in our database. So whether it be an alter statement or a create statement or pretty much anything, that's all going to be defined by what we're trapping for. So DML triggers, data manipulation language triggers, they go on tables for insert and update statements. DDL triggers go on databases, or we can even put a DDL trigger at the server level, and then we have to trap for a specific type of event, which I'll get to in a second. The first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to create a log table to trap for all of these events, and we have a couple of columns in here. The first one is just an event ID, DDL event ID. This is just a unique identifier for the column because there may be a lot of data in here, and rather than use an auto-numbered integer field, a unique identifier is better. We also have the DDL event, which is going to be the actual event that took place. So the create or the alter statement, whatever was run against our table in our database, or any table in our database, it'll get trapped. Also the actual transact SQL code that tried to run that event on any of our objects, and then the user that did it and the time that it happened. So we'll go ahead and highlight this code, hit execute, and now we should have, I'm going to go ahead and hide our results pane there. Inside of our tables, if we refresh this, there we go. We have our DDL log table. The next thing we need to do is create the actual DDL trigger itself. And this isn't something you can actually do in the interface at all here. You can see if we go into our programmability section here, you can see here database triggers. And by default, this is just a DDL trigger that was placed in the AdventureWorks table, or excuse me, database by default here. So this is already there. But again, you can't just right click and choose new trigger. You actually have to do this in code. But it's very simple. We use the create trigger statement. We follow by on database for, and then the type of events that we're going to trap for. And basically what this little keyword here is going to do, it's going to define what data gets trapped for us whenever this trigger is fired. And to show you here, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. What happens is anytime a statement is going to get fired, a DDL statement is going to get fired against our table, it's going to generate this block of XML that's going to hold this data inside of it, such as the event type, the time that it happened, the security process identifier, the server name that happened on, the login name, the username, the database name, and then some other things down here, such as the schema name, the actual object name, the type of object, and then the transact SQL code that did it. So this is called the event instance data. And if we scroll back up to our trigger here that we're creating, what we're going to do inside of our trigger, we need to declare a variable called XML data of data type XML. Then we're going to put inside this variable using the set statement the result of the event data function. This function is going to simply return this XML data. So very simple. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to insert a record into that table we just created. So our DDL log table here, and it's pretty simple how this works. I'm going to go ahead and expand our tables here and expand our DDL log table, and here's our columns. And how it works here is we do insert DDL log followed by the values. And so we don't have to specify the columns, of course, because we have 5 columns here and then 5 values, so they're going to go sequentially into that table. So how it works here, the first column is we're just going to generate a brand new GUID here, a brand new globally unique identifier, and pop it into our unique identifier column. The next 3, we're going to basically query this XML data that is stored in our XML variable, and then pop them as well into our columns. And how this works is pretty cool. This is all new to SQL 2005 because the XML variable is actually brand new. The XML data type is new to SQL Server. So how this works is we have a method called .value that we can call off of our XML variable. And what it's going to accept is two parameters. The first parameter is going to be what's called an XPath statement, and that's called the XML path language. And really, it's just a little language to traverse the directory of an XML. So if you treat XML as directories, kind of like you see it here, we have our root element and then we have child elements under here. It's just a path language is what it's called. We're just navigating the structure of this path, just as we would a Windows directory structure, kind of the same way. I like to think of it like that because it's simple. We can all relate to navigating a directory structure. Same thing with XML. So that's kind of what this statement is doing here, is we're saying, all right, we want to go, you use the forward to denote kind of a new directory path, but we want to go into our event instance, which is the root XML element. Then we want to navigate to the next level, the event type. And since there's only one of them here, we just want to say, yep, pretty much the first ordinal of that event type element and extract the contents out. So that'll just get the data right out of our event type XML node here. Pretty simple. The next parameter there, the next parameter we have on here is the data type that you want to convert that data to. And of course, our event type here is the nvarchar, or nvarchar as some say, and it's 100. So just character data, we're just converting this to a 100 length varying character data type. So that'll pop that into our DDL event column. The next one we're going to do is grab that tsql command right out of our XML data. As you can see here, that's the last one in here. So we're going to grab that tsql command out of there, convert that to the nvarchar as well, and we're going to say the max here. So it's just going to convert it to the max and pop it in there. The next thing we're going to do is grab our login name and pop that into here and convert that as well. So very simple to do this. You can see not much to our trigger. Really the bulk of the work is just extracting the data out of that XML and popping it into our table as a row. Again, this stuff is easy. We're just taking that event data inside of our trigger and popping it into a variable, and again, just extracting it out of here. So let's go ahead and create our trigger here. We'll highlight it, hit execute, and boom, it's been created. And you'll be able to see this if we go back down into programmability, into our database triggers. We can right click and choose refresh. There it is, our DDL logger trigger. Now, if anything were to happen, let's go ahead and create another little table here, testing DDL table. We'll hit execute. And you can see one row affected. That's actually the trigger doing the work there. And let's go ahead and scroll down here and also grab our alter table statement. We're going to add a column in here called flag with a bit data type. We'll hit execute. And then we're going to drop this table all in one shot. So we created it, altered it, and dropped it. Now, if we go into our tables, right-click on our DDL log table and choose Open Table, all of those statements should have been logged. And you can see it's going to go ahead and open it up here. Look at that. There's our identifiers there. There's our event. There's our create table, alter table, drop table. And then the actual transact SQL code that we ran. There it is. The user, that's us. And then the date and time that it happened. So, pretty cool. Pretty simple to do too, huh? We just basically create a table, wire up a trigger into our database, and then any statement from there on out is a logged one. Now, a couple of things I want to mention here. Again, as I mentioned earlier, depending on what you're trapping for, you'll get a different set of XML back. So, take a look because there are hundreds of different events you can type for. Just type in DDL events in Books Online and you'll get a whole slew of different events that you can search for, and it's all well documented. So, depending on the event that you choose that you're trapping for, you'll see an associated set of XML that'll come back from this event data function. So, we can, of course, write our appropriate XPath queries to grab the specific data out of it. So easy stuff. Once you get the hang of this stuff, very easy to do, very, very powerful as well. It's just a matter of finding the event you want to trap for and then writing the appropriate XPath query to extract that out and log it. Now let's take this a step further and talk about server level DDL triggers. Check it out. We can do this at the server level as well as the database level. It all works the exact same. I'm going to keep this a little simpler because what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of creating a log table, really what you need to do is if you're going to log all of this data at the server level, you might want to get your own dedicated database for logging in general, and then you'll have a logging database and you can toss everything in there. But what we're going to do here, you can see create trigger, DDL trigger login. This time we're going to create it at the server level, and all you do is do an on all server, and that'll just basically create it on the current server that you're sitting on. For this time, instead of database level events, we're going to monitor for DDL login events. So basically a create login, a drop login, alter login, things like that are all going to be trapped for us. And instead of inserting it into a table, we're going to print the event data out. So this will print out the actual XML, and this is a great way to see the exact XML that comes back as well. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're just casting this event data from XML to a varying character of 2,000 characters. So I'll just print it out for us. And then we're going to select the actual tsql command value out of it just to show you that we can do things like this rather than create variables. But again, this isn't logging it anywhere. This is just simply printing it to the screen. So let's create our trigger here. I'll highlight this, hit execute. We'll go ahead and hide the result pane. And just to show you where they store that, if we go out to the server level, not in the databases, but into our server objects, triggers, we'll refresh it. There we go. There's our DDL trigger login trigger. Now, if we go ahead, highlight our create login statement here, create login tester testing with password and this password, and then hit the old execute button here. Check it out. And you're going to see right here, the select statement actually didn't do anything. It didn't return anything. And I did that on purpose. I'm going to show you why. But if you go to messages, the print statement always sends everything to the messages here. Look at that. Here's the actual XML data all thrown out for us. So you could actually copy this and then paste it into an XML file and look at an Internet Explorer, and it would show you the XML broken out, tabbed out appropriately. But that's it. Very simple to do. Now, the reason this returned null is because if you look in here, we are selecting the tsql command XPath query. But you know what? This DDL login event, I'm going to go ahead and hide our window pane here, doesn't have a tsql command element in it. Again, that's all because we're analyzing a different set of events, not database level events, but DDL login events. And it just so happens that this login events XML doesn't have a tsql command, so it didn't return anything. You can see it returns different XML. Yeah, some of it's the same, event type, post time, but a lot of it's different. The login type, whether it's a SQL login or not. And this is basically exactly what this returned here. I copied it and pasted it in here just to show you. But this is a SQL login that we created here. Shows with default database and just everything about the login, basically. So that's how we can do DDL level logins at the server level and the database level. Pretty cool stuff. It's just a matter, again, of finding the event that you want to trap for and then ensuring that you're grabbing the right XPath query to grab and extract the correct data. So that's DDL triggers. You can tell I'm a big fan of this logging and auditing stuff simply because things go wrong. It's just the nature of the business that we work and live in every day. And the more data we have at our disposal, the more we'll know the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why, and how things happen. So good stuff when it comes to logging and auditing these DDL triggers. All right, so in the CBC Nugget, we took a look at monitoring activity and performance. We started off with a look at all the different tools that are available to us when monitoring activity or performance. We started off with a look at performance and saw that the system monitor, which was the old performance monitor in NT4 and Windows 2000, is still pretty much the de facto standard when it comes to monitoring performance either at the Windows or the SQL Server level. So we took a look at some of the common counters in there in SQL Server. We looked at the buffer manager counter, the memory management counters, and the database level counters, pretty much all very common and commonly used counters to find those performance bottlenecks. We then moved into SQL Server activity and saw how to view current SQL Server activity by using that nifty new interface that allows us to consolidate all of our different log files, whether it's SQL Server log or event log, SQL agent logs. We can consolidate them all into one single interface and then search on it or filter on it. And very, very handy. It's going to save us a lot of time when we're looking for specific events or things that have happened in SQL Server. We then took a big look at the SQL Server Profiler, one of my favorite tools out there, and we took a nice little demo on that to saw how we create a trace. We can hook up and look for specific events, and then we went into SQL Server Management Studio, fired some of those events off, and watched them filter on down into the SQL Server Profiler. Again, a very nifty tool. I advise you to get familiar with it because it'll save you a lot of time when you're doing troubleshooting and help you become that troubleshooting master. We then at the end here took a big look at DDL triggers, data definition language triggers, both at the database and the server level, and showed you how you can audit and log certain events that take place. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.